Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So we want to bring you something hopeful and helpful for your everyday life, whether you've been following Jesus for a while or you're still trying to figure out exactly what you do believe about God. Now, you'll find on this podcast things that'll help with conversations about marriage and parenting and mental health and work, practical things to help you in your faith journey, and a lot more. So whether you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app or you're watching on YouTube, be sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. I'm excited to share with all of you a conversation that I had with Mark Weigt, where we're answering lots of your questions about politics. We're going to get into things like, hey, how do I get over being offended? Hey, what do I do if I think a political party's policies are harming my family? And a lot more. This is a great, really way to wrap up our series that's been about politics and how do we navigate through this challenging season. This is going to be a 2-part episode, and this is the first part of my conversation with Mark. Well, hey, Mark, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Once again, you must couldn't get anyone else, so you got to bring me back on. So I'm glad to be here.
Man, I am super excited to have this conversation today. I feel like these last few months have been so charged politically, and it's not easing up any over the next few months. And so to come off of the series that we just went on, where I felt like you did a great job of just, I think, giving some truth that probably nobody wants to hear, but is reality. So I'm just excited to dive into today's conversation.
Yeah, me too. This is for me, this series was a long time coming. And I felt, the heart of it was, I think for the most part, two things. One, I think Jesus followers in particular, but I think just non-Jesus followers as well. You have the minority that's like, nope, we're going to dig in and we're going to, no, all that stuff. And then you get the majority going like, I don't want to feel this way and I don't want to go through this again. And will you help me navigate this? And for Jesus followers to go, hey, listen, there's a way to go through this where you don't lose your influence. And so for me, and I just saw that in 2020 and all that stuff, I just saw so much influence lost at the altar of something that's going to change, or not that it's not important, but it's not near as important to what people need. And that's to know about Jesus and how he can change their life as a different vision for their life. And his kingdom is really the ultimate kingdom that we want to be a part of.
Yeah. You mentioned losing your influence a few times, and I know we've chatted about it before, but why do you think that's such a key thing? And like, what do you think we lose when we do lose our influence?
Well, if you lose your influence, you've lost everything. All right. So losing your influence, there's so much tied to it. There's trust, there's credibility. There is someone's willingness to actually hear or listen to you. And you might as well just be white noise to them after that. And so influence, if not the most important, is in the top 2 or 3 most important things that we have in relationships, especially relationships of, well, lack of a better term, influence, where we're trying to help people move towards Jesus and connect with Jesus that aren't normally doing that and all that stuff. You lose influence, you're done. You're done.
Yeah. And I don't think that's a typical way people think through or process a lot of their decision makings. Like how has this affected our relationship? They maybe do that in terms of like, oh, is the person treating me well or things like that. But in terms of our ability to help somebody grow or even, I think, be there for somebody in a like impactful way is gone when we do lose influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we sacrifice a lot. I think this is where we talked about the enemy's trap and the bait throughout these last 2 weeks. I think what we lose sight of is we fall for it so much because as Jesus followers, there's so much about how we treat other people, but yet all of a sudden when we're politically charged and all that stuff, we justify mistreating people. We justify We justify our, hey, well, they're hurting our country, or they're hurting this or hurting that. And then we just impose all sort of judgment on them, and that we're called not to judge, but to love other people. I mean, just all, and that's just the scratching of the surface of it. And so we start to compromise or confuse all sorts of things at the altar of politics. Once again, as I said, there's serious. It's not that politics is not important. It's we elevate it to the most important. And or I look at it this way. I mentioned this a little bit, but here is the thing: we know, and I know Jesus followers, and it's easy to happen. Okay, so I'm not judging. It's just this is one of those litmus tests. We know Jesus followers who they're wearing stuff, they're posting stuff, they're yard signing stuff, and they are trying to convert people to a political party. But then when you say, "Man, why don't you have that same passion for Jesus?" And they won't even acknowledge that. And you know what that's called? Idolatry. Idolatry. And that's devastating.
Yeah. How now there may be a little bit of if you're at a certain point on the on either side that this may be a challenging conversation anyway that maybe somebody's not even going to tune in for. But say they are willing. They're willing to listen, even though they're staunch proponent of their political beliefs. Mm-hmm. What would you have an encouragement for them? Would you have any, hey, here's a question I would ask yours. Maybe that's the right way to say it. What's a question you would have them ask themselves to like kind of check and see, hey, are my priorities in the right spot?
So there's nothing wrong with aligning yourself, let's just say, in a certain place politically. Would it be right or left? Okay, this isn't about being in the middle. I mean, this isn't what the series is about. This is about who's first. So what question? If you find yourself getting emotionally angry or worked up or anxious or fearful right away, and if your default then is the rhetoric of that particular party, if that is your default, and that's where you find yourself going, well, if we don't win, then this. Hey, if this doesn't happen, then this. And it's all about fear and loss, which is every political party's strategy. I mean, it just really is. I mean, that's the strategy. Hey, what are we going to do? How can we get them afraid? Because that promotes action. And we know if they're afraid and we tell them they're going to lose something, that's going to generate that's going to motivate action as well. It's the same strategy every time. Okay, so back to your question. If you find yourself going down that way, then that is a huge red flag of, hey, maybe I have flipped my priorities here and I'm putting my hope in something that I know ultimately can't do what it's saying it's going to do. It can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that portion of the message and just talking about it. Ultimately, our hope is in Jesus. Our hope is that God will move in our communities and our homes and in our country. And there's things that we have to do in order to see that. And it's not promote our political party to a certain degree or get the right votes done. It's, we need to check our own hearts and our actions towards others. And nobody ever wants to start with themselves first, do they?
Well, they don't. And here's what they don't want to do as well, especially if you align with a political party. And once again, that's not a bad thing. But here's when you've lost a critical eye. And the critical eye is this: you actually hold them accountable for results. And so, for example, I can remember this in 2016. I talked to the staff about this. I said, I can remember when, all the fear tactics, and Hillary Clinton had them as well. I mean, Trump leveled them at her. So I'm just using this as an example. It was, well, if Donald Trump gets elected, he's got access to the nukes and we're going to be in all these wars. Well, there was none. When Joe Biden, it was told, man, the market's going to crash and it's going to be horrible. Actually, the market has gone up from 30,000 to 40,000. Okay, so what does that mean? It means those things didn't happen. So a lot of the fear mongering never happens, but we never look at the results with politics. We hardly do. We just go, well, they just need more people, and they need more people in the Senate. They need more people in the House so they can push these things. We never look at the bottom line. Or if a politician's performing poorly, they would get fired from their normal job, but in politics, you get promoted. It's just, because our heart is for the party. It's not for the performance of the leader. It hardly ever is.
Yeah. Well, I wonder. So we asked all listeners, people coming into service, people watching online, to text in some questions.
Yeah,
And we got
good.
some, and I love to ask them to you. And some of these I paraphrased a little bit to condense them, and some of them I kind of made them a little bit more neutral, just for the sake of making sure that people, ever like you mentioned, we can listen with open hands and open ears. But let me start with this one. Besides prayer and reading the Bible, can you talk about practical ways to step over an offense? Maybe could you describe a situation where you had to work to step over an offense? So this, I think, is based on the first week of the series, where you talked about, hey, you have to be able to move past when you get offended.
Yeah, I think there's what I didn't have time for. There's different levels and layers to an offense. All right. So, like, for example, if it's political disagreement, let's just use that as an example. Okay. So there's differences in beliefs in some way. I believe this, you believe that, all that stuff. So it's a matter of being right. That if you're a Jesus follower, you just, once again, look at the person, not the belief system. And what we tend to do is we look at the belief system and then we identify that to the person. So if you're a Jesus follower and you're dealing with, let's just say you're having a conversation with not a Jesus follower, here's what I always tell people: who cares what they believe? Well, yeah, I'm trying to, who cares? And because that just doesn't matter. What matters most is, man, where are they with God? And how can I love them and invest in that relationship in a way that's going to reveal to them, man, that there's a God who loves them so much that he sent Jesus for them. Okay. So if you're being offended by, differing beliefs, then honestly, then that's something that is a you thing and not the person thing. Okay. Because you're not seeing it right now. If it's another Jesus follower and you're disagreeing over it, I would just not engage in those conversations if it's not a safe conversation. Now, if you're dealing now another layer would be you're in a relationship with someone, whether it be a boss or neighbor or, family member, and those things there's constant offenses happening. Okay, that's just and you can't do anything about it. It's out of your control. It's how they're acting towards you, which is very common. Two things. One, what are some boundaries that you can set that can limit the exposure of those things to you? And we're not great at boundaries. None of us are, because we feel like we're hurting people and, we don't like conflict or just different. What are some of those things where and boundary literally means you're putting up a fence, so to speak. You're defining the limitations of that relationship. So what are some things you can do there? And then here's the second thing, John. If that's going to continue to happen, then you got to get used to ongoing forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't a one-time thing. Forgiveness is every time you're offended, you have to cancel the debt against that person. And then you have to move on. Oh, they offended me again. Yep, I got to do it again. And when you stop doing it, your heart will start to harden. On a continual basis, you keep your heart from hardening. And so those are the things that I would say in regards to that.
There's a lot of good stuff in there. Can I Can I ask a follow-up on the
please.
The boundaries thing? Is that would you recommend, is that a conversation you say, hey, I think I'd really prefer if we didn't talk about these things? What level of here's where you share what your boundaries are in that conversation. And I get it. This is a nuanced thing, right? Because if you don't trust the person to even have this conversation, then there may be some other things that you need to work through, but in a general sense, maybe.
Yeah. I think, and if the offense is illegal, okay, you seek legal. Okay. I forgot that one. I mean, it's really important. Okay. You don't sit there and just have to take that and all that stuff. Okay. I think if any time clarity is kindness. So anytime you can sit down, we like to assume, or we don't like the conflict. Okay. Because we're afraid they're going to respond, but we're already responding. So and you never know what they're thinking or feeling. So I think anytime you can sit down and have a candid, loving, you're doing it out of love. You can have a candid, loving conversation with someone. I think that's really important. And here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm feeling. What do you think and feel as well? And you ask them questions in return. So it's not just, I need this. It is, man, here's what I'm thinking and feeling. Tell me about this on your end. And then you then clearly define what you need going out from there.
Yeah. Do you think some of that, like a hesitation to have those conversations, stems from a fear that, oh, I'm going to kind of reveal some of my political thoughts? I'm going to reveal some of my beliefs on this thing. And if they're different, I'm worried that that person is going to see me, talk to me differently.
I think if that is the case, okay, then you need to make sure you lead with, if it's a political type thing or a belief type thing, hey, this isn't about that. And you just need to let them know, hey, this is about the relationship.
Yeah.
And so that's how you need to. And here's the thing, if they don't respond, or two things, if they agree to it and then they keep breaking it, which is what people will do usually right away, they're going to test your boundaries. They're going to test them. You need to then go back to that conversation. Hey, remember when we talked about this? Yeah. Hey, listen, you did that this week. Would you mind, hey, we want to stay within the boundaries because, we talked about this. But if they just keep breaking them, yeah, and which some people are, then you got to make some decisions. You got to make some decisions.
I remember you once shared I thought it was really powerful story of your neighbors and you having, I think it was like at a bonfire or something. And somehow like a political topic came up. Yeah. That you had I don't even think it was confirmed, but you might have had a different opinion and they gave you a hard time for it. Would you share maybe your response and how that helped?
Yeah, I said, so they're talking politics, which they always would when we're around. And Don and I just never engaged in it. We just nodded our head. Yeah, okay, yeah, just nod our head. Because once again, our influence matters. We didn't want to do anything that was going to compromise our influence. And this wasn't one of those relationships that we knew was safe.
Yeah.
I said that first week, your conversations limit to 3 or 4 people, that there's trust and safety and all that stuff. Okay, well, this wasn't, even though we were close with our neighbors. So when they turned around and said, hey, you guys never say anything, who do you vote for? And we didn't say anything, like, nah, it just doesn't matter. They're like, you guys probably vote different than us. And they started to jump on us. And that's where I drew a line in the sand. And I said to them, we've been together all these years and we love you. We love your kids. And we've listened to you guys talk about political stuff and we have never engaged in it. Why would you now, just because you think we might vote differently, why would that change your feelings about us and how we feel about you? And they were like, yeah, you're right. Like, it shouldn't matter. And so I actually had to bring out something. And sometimes we have to do this in an environment like this. We have to bring out something. We have to elevate the conversation to go, hey, I don't care about that stuff. I care about you more than that stuff. Yeah. And when people hear about that, it kind of takes them back and they were like, you're right. You're right. And they moved on. It was great.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a really tangible, practical way to do it too, right? Where you've backed up what you're then saying, right? Where you've proved already that the relationship matters more to you than those conversations. And so it gives a lot of credibility when you're able to stand and say, hey, remember how our relationships always mattered? Let's keep it that way.
But that's what wisdom up front with stuff like this does, John. That's hey, I'm not going to go there. We pre-decided, I'm not going to go there. Here's why. We're not going to have these people can't handle it. We're not going to lose our influence. All those things where we said, this is more important than this. And so that determined how we're going to respond in those environments.
The second piece that you talked about was that like continual forgiveness. And man, we are not good at this.
It's tough. No, it's tough.
Is there, I feel like in my experience, forgiveness only happens when I have like the right framework of mind. You know what I mean? Like it's got to be a conscious thing. It is not a like, oh, I accidentally forgave you. You know what I mean? Do you have any maybe tips on, okay, here's what you need to like remind yourself when you're in the process of trying to forgive someone?
Yeah. Well, first off, as Jesus followers, we're called to live with a constant heart to forgive. All right. So it's part of our calling. So it needs to be on the forefront. I think sometimes we look at forgiveness as a burden.
Yeah.
And actually it's a blessing. All right. So, that's got to be at the forefront. So for me, I know that if my heart gets punched, let's just say, or someone wrongs me, whether it be a lot or a little, that I know that if I don't, my heart's going to start to get harder. So I always just know that this is really for me. This isn't about the other person. And I want to live with a soft heart and a tender heart. and a heart that's able to impact others, all that stuff. Okay. So for me, I just always live in the forefront of, nope, I need to deal with it quickly. And Jesus, I mean, he said 7 times 70, right? So that was his way of going, yeah, you're going to get offended a lot. You're going to get hurt a lot. So be quick to do it. Be quick to do it. Yeah, but that's too much. It's never too much because of what it does to our heart when we don't.
Yeah. I think that's super helpful. I think the quickness thing, I think that has a really powerful potential because, and I think you'll love this, right? It's almost like the illustration of like a root growing or something. there's a little
it is.
metaphor there.
Well, it does. It's a slow, and then it's slowly, and it gets bigger, and it gets bigger, and it gets bigger, and then the bigger it gets, the harder it is to rip out.
Yeah, the more painful it is.
Deal with it
right?
deal with it before it grows, and I think that's why Jesus says, "No, be quick, do it quickly."
So we have another question about offenses. If this overlaps too much, if there's anything new it sparks, feel free. How do you let go of an offense that's repeated over and over again? It sounds like particularly this is happening in the workplace. So how do I keep my job and yet deal with a difficult person who repeatedly offends people?
Yeah. Once again, you got to be quick to forgive. I mean, and once again, it's not about the other person. It's about us and for us. If you can't have the boundary conversation. So if you can have the boundary conversation, have the boundary conversation. If it's illegal or inappropriate, then you need to take the appropriate steps there as far as that's concerned. But if they aren't willing, and for whatever reason they aren't willing, then unfortunately you may have to make a tough decision. Can I live with this or can I not? And if you can't, I mean, if it's whatever it may be, you may have to look for another job, unfortunately. But if it's something that you can clarify and they are open to the boundaries, then it's our calling to step in there and have that conversation in a loving and candid way.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be nice if there was a perfect, easy solution.
I think more people, here's what I've discovered, and I'm a personality style where comes easier for, so I get this. Okay.
Yeah.
But when we are willing to have these conversations, once again, in a loving way, we're not there to judge people or things like that. But I think more people want to have these conversations than we realize.
Yeah. I've also noticed that one of the things that can be helpful is also framing it as something that's like you're looking out for the other person too, right? I think that comes into some of the love.
Well, valuing, like, hey, say you value the relationship. You value the relationship. I value the person. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. This is just about, here's what I need because I get this. It is valuing the relationship.
Yeah. Okay. This next question, I think it touches at a lot of the roots about, you talk about the importance of politics. And I think you can hear the heartbeat behind this one. How can I not be offended by a political party that has policies that I believe make life worse for my family?
How can you not be offended? Well, I don't think you... Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the question is, why shouldn't I be offended? Or why, how can I, isn't it just natural? Of course I'm going to be offended if this political party has policies that are going to be hurting me.
Yeah. Once again, going back to Jesus' words, we're going to be offended. Okay, so it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in situations like this, because I guarantee you, there's the other party that's doing things to hurt other people, and we're not saying that they're intentionally doing to hurt people. Okay, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, but on the receiving end of those, that is real. Yeah. That's real. So we got to do what we said as far as, hey, you got to let that go and forgive. And you just got to do it. And then here's the thing, vote for the other party. Vote for the other party. And here's the thing, most people vote for what's best for them. They may say that they're voting for what's best for the country, and I'm sure their heart and motive is in the right place. But when you go by all the layers, it's they're voting for what's best for them. You know what I'm voting for? What's best for me. And I'm not going, man, these policies, man, they're going to destroy my family. I think I'm going to vote for that. No, we vote what's best for us. Everybody does. And since we all have different stories and different aspects to our story, that's going to look differently with different people. And so now there's other aspects to this where now you can bring in what we think is best for our country. Okay. But for the most part, below the layers, we think we vote what's best for us. That's why the economy is always number one. It's always number one.
I think, and something that you mentioned this last weekend, I think touches on this, where you brought up the idea of trying to truly understand the people who support the opposing policy or party, and how there's probably something you don't know if you're saying, well, how could you possibly support? How could you possibly do this? Because both sides do it, right?
They do. Mm-hmm.
And I think this is that danger zone that you definitely get into, because then you've villainized the other person because they believe something is better. They believe the best choice is different than what you think is the best choice.
Yeah. And if there's ever a chance, and I realize there's not always a chance, okay, but if you could ever get in front of a leader in your city or state that's in government of any kind, if you ever get that opportunity, and the question you want to ask is, hey, tell me why you support this. And this is that policy that hurts your family. And listen to what they have to say. I think it's really important if you ever get that chance. And sometimes you can do it at a city level.
Yeah.
And once again, I know never, but if you ever get the chance, I think that's worth having that conversation.
So it sounds like the big takeaways, one, try to hear why somebody might have that perspective, or how maybe it's helping a different group, even if it's not your group. And two, man, if this is just going to happen. You're going to be offended.
John, it's impossible to have policies that are going to help everybody just based on the complexity of our country and the stories and the challenges. It's impossible. Yeah. It's impossible.
Yeah. Okay. This one is an interesting one. We got this one from YouTube. Where in the Bible does it support the idea of Christians voting? And shouldn't we just trust God to take care of everything?
It's a great question. It might surprise. I say this: it doesn't say it in the Bible that we have to vote. It doesn't. And so, nor does it in the Constitution, I believe. Constitution doesn't say you're required to vote.
Yeah.
So in the series, I talked about voting, and here's why I just talked about voting. First off, because we live in a country that gives us the freedom to voice our opinion or concern. And so why not leverage that? Because government is instituted by God, and with the government that we have here that allows that, and to be a part of that process, why wouldn't we want to? But Bible doesn't say we have to vote. Gotcha. Okay, it doesn't. So if you don't want to vote, you don't have to vote. Now go back to why don't we just leave it up to God? That's what I call a passive approach to following Jesus. And so for many of us, we use this passive approach. And sometimes there is a passive approach where God says, I want you to wait. But while you're waiting, here's what I want you to do in the meantime while this gets worked out. Okay, that's not even passive, though. That is, God wants to do something during that waiting period in you, and that you have to decide if you want to be a part of that. What we're talking about here is, well, I'm just going to leave it up to God. Yep. And here's what God does. I want you to partner with me in what I want to do. And then you're not responsible for the results. You're responsible for being a part of the process. And the results are up to me. But we're called to be a part of processes with God. He wants us to partner with him on things. And this would be one of these things where do we need to partner with God on who wins or loses an election? No, we don't have to. But then we just can't say, well, I'm just going to leave it up to God. I'm just going to leave it up to God. We just can't do that, because that's just being like, it doesn't matter what I do or what anyone else does, because God's already determined and going to control it. And he's kind of this magic king that's just moving the pieces and parts the way he wants it, versus I'm inviting you into a process. I want you to walk through this process with me. And because God always wants us to partner with him, because that's why he made us. It's why he made us. So we should vote and trust God with the results, no matter what happens, and be okay with that. Yeah.
The combination of both of those things. And I love that you talk about how maybe it's just God wants to do something in your own personal growth. He's just going to use this and how you pray for the election and how you pray for leaders to help you grow and understand and grow your heart for all people. So
Well, we're always concerned with the results, rightfully so. Okay, we want things to turn out the way we want them to. So we all struggle with that's called control. We're all control freaks. But God is more concerned with the process and how we engage with Him in the process.
Yeah,
He really is.
Well, that was part 1 of my conversation with Mark. I hope you'll join for part 2, which is going to be airing next week. We're going to dive into some more topics, such as, hey, how do you talk to your kids about politics? Thanks for listening this week. And if you liked it, please give us a follow, a subscribe, so that way you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.